Then final is Jihad Bil Saif. Now you use arms. As we have seen, in that process of revolution. These are the stages. So this is the ideological jihad. Here you specify that ideology, that goal with the word fi sabil. And you add harf ba, bil mal, bil nafs, bil qalam, bil lisan, bil yad, bil Quran, bil saif, bil quwwah. You can go on adding the words. Now, there are 3 levels of this ideological jihad. And now we are coming actually directly to jihad fi sabilillah. There are 3 stages. What is the ideology of Islam or Quran? Allah is the ruler of this world. Sovereignty belongs to Him and Him alone. It's the duty of the Muslims to establish His rule in this world. For this cause, you have to make jihad. This is jihad fi sabilillah. You may call it to establish the kingdom of heaven on earth. This is the terminology adopted by Bible. Just like we have Surah Al-Fatiha. They have the Lord's Prayer. And the words are, Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heavens. Your will should be supreme. And that's the word that the Prophet used. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. لِتَكُونَ كَلِمَةُ اللَّهِ الْعُلْيَا. So that the word of Allah, the command of Allah becomes supreme. So actually, there are so many terms, but the meanings are the same. एक फूल का मजमू हो तो 100 रंग से बांधो. Pluralism in terminology, but actually what is meant is the same thing. You may call it establishing the system of caliphate. When you establish the system of sovereignty of Allah, what does it mean? For humanity, it is the caliphate. So establishing the deen of Allah on earth, establishing the kingdom of heaven on earth, establishing the system of khilafah on earth, you may call it anything, but this is the goal, this is the cause, this is the nasabul ain, this is the adrash. If one is working to that end, he is a mujahid fi sabilillah. Now there are 3 stages of this jihad fi sabilillah also. First of all, establish Allah's deen on your own self. Be a caliph of Allah, vicegerent of Allah on your own body, on your own self, and be a caliph of Allah in the sphere where you have authority. If you are the head of a family, you have the authority. Kullukum ra'in wa kullukum mas'ulun an ra'iyatihi. Each one of you is like, a shepherd. And he has the goats, in his custody. And he is responsible for the goats and the sheep. So actually, in the same way, every human being has some human beings given to him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his family. And he is the custodian. He has to behave as caliph of Allah. Number 1, on his own body, on his own personality, and then in the sphere and zone of his authority. This we call in the Quranic terminology, Ubudullah. Be a bondsman to Allah. Worship Allah alone. This we call in Quranic terminology, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu udkhulu fis silmi kaffah. Enter Islam totally. Obey Allah in totality. You cannot discriminate between His commandments. أَفَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِبَعْضِ الْكِتَابِ وَتَكْفُرُونَ بِبَعْضٍ فَمَا جَزَاءُ مَنْ يَفْعَلُ ذَلِكَ مِنْكُمْ إِلَّا خِزْيٌ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَيَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ يُرَدُّونَ إِلَىٰ أَشَدِّ الْعَذَابِ. I have repeated this ayah many times during these days, and I am not going to translate it again. So actually this is the first stage of jihad fi sabilillah. Before establishing the rule of Allah on earth, you establish it on your own self. And if you are not doing it, and you claim that you want to establish the deen of Allah on earth, you are a hypocrite, a munafiq. You are a liar. You have to establish the deen of Allah on your own personality, on your own self, and in your own sphere of authority first of all. That is why this is called the real jihad, the basic jihad, and the supreme jihad. But here please note, if you have a 3-storied building, the highest is the 3rd story, but the most important is the 1st story, because the 2nd story cannot exist without 1st. What to speak of the 3rd? Highest is the 3rd. Highest jihad would be to establish the deen of Allah on earth. But the most important jihad is to establish the deen of Allah on your own self. Because without that you can't proceed. Just as you can't build the 2nd story without the 1st one. And what to speak of the 3rd one? There's no possibility. You can't build it in atmosphere, in air. You have to have the 1st story first, and then the 2nd, and then the 3rd. So that is why when the Prophet was asked a question, direct question, Ayyul jihad afzalu ya Rasulallah. Now here please note the word afzal. Afzal is something which is most precious, which is most important. But ala is something which is highest. So actually these 2 words you must keep in mind. Ala and afzal. Ayyul jihad afzalu ya Rasulallah. An tujahida nafsaka fi ta'atillah. And the answer was that you make jihad against your own id or libido or baser self, or against your own animal instincts, and you compel your nafs to obey Allah. And let me mention here again one thing. I said, at some time in my discussion that I'll explain the word hijrah also. Hijrah, which we in Urdu pronounce hijrat. This is the negative side of jihad. To obey Allah, you have to leave certain things. You have to leave haram to be a Muslim actually. You have to refrain from those things which have been forbidden. Then only you can claim to be a Muslim. So actually hijrah and jihad go side by side. And here let me quote the hadith. He was asked a question, Ayyul hijrat afzalu ya Rasulullah. Which hijrat is afzal? The answer was, An tahjura kullama yakrahuhu. That you give away, you refrain from everything which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't like.